Hey there, so all of you are interested in communication. It could be a blog article, a college assignment essay, a TED talk, a speech, or even a YouTube video. So on the show today, we have with us someone who's a director of Tall Tales. He's a teacher of public speaking and interested in filmmaking. So let me quickly get on to Michael Burns. Michael, hey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be your guest.
And thank you for being there. And you know, this is something that a lot of people have called in and said we want to know about how to frame that story. That story could be a blog article, like we said, it could be a speech, it could be anything, but people want to write.
Yeah.
So how do you frame that story? And let me first ask you the first big question. How do you start that story?
Everybody wants to be a better storyteller.
Right.
Everybody wants to be a writer. I even get business cards from marketing executives that say brand storyteller on them now. The word storytelling is everywhere.
Yeah.
One of the most important things off the start that I always tell people, so whether you're writing or you're delivering something in person, is to hook the audience. Grab them with something they can relate to. No matter what the subject matter of your story might be, in life we all go through the same things. Questions of honesty, loyalty, commitment, what our sense of destiny is.
Right.
These are called universal themes.
Right.
So one of the tips that I give people is to touch on one of those universal elements so that everyone can relate to your story, even if the subject matter is something that we had no experience with.
Sure. So they say, can you frame someone's problem as a question?
Exactly.
And throw that at them. Is that a strategy?
Yeah. So, for example, I'm doing some TED coaching right now with a doctor who studies tuberculosis. And his first instinct is kind of give you some facts and figures about tuberculosis from a doctor's perspective.
Right.
But I said, let's talk about coughing, because coughing is something we can all relate to, the germs that we encounter on a daily basis. So what's interesting about the work that I do is that sometimes we're trying so hard to show our expertise at writing or speech making or something like that, but it's the human factor that's far more interesting to people, how we relate rather than how we differ.
Yeah, so tell us about Tall Tales first. You know, you've got this wonderful franchise. I've attended a couple of these as well.
I would like to be a franchise someday. About 3.5 years ago, I put together one night of storytelling. Now in the US, there's an organization called the Moth, M-O-T-H.
Oh, okay.
And this type of live, in Europe also, this type of live storytelling is quite popular. I thought it might be fun to do something in India where people from the public submit true personal stories that are about 10 or 15 minutes long. Here we are, over 1,200 submissions later. The last show was our 57th show.
Wow.
And we featured over 215 storytellers during that time.
So you're talking about storytelling, you're talking about speeches, so people want to do both, but help us understand the difference between the two.
There are several differences between speeches and stories, but I think the most fundamental one is that a speech is almost always about something that you did well. So just think about an award show or something like that. You get up there, you say, thanks for this award, I'm so proud of our team, we did X, Y, and Z. But a great story almost always starts with something where you failed. Okay. Some mistake you made, something embarrassing. Yes, maybe at the end you learned from it or did something like that, but when you're able to go up in front of a group of strangers and talk about where things didn't go so well for you, they love that. They love that humility, that instead of building yourself up and saying how amazing you are, you say, I'm just like you. In fact, I might even be dumber than the average person. And then you talk about what you learned from it and where you went from there. So
Michael's stories and personal stories have always warmed our hearts. But tell me, what really makes a good story?
I always think about this in terms of like a boyfriend and girlfriend lying in bed together, and one turns to the other and says, honey, tell me a story. And it's pretty much the scariest thing anybody can ask you, because you're wondering, are my stories going to be good enough? I don't have a story. What do I do? A story is many different things, but one of the things that makes a great story is understanding that a story is simply a sequence of change, of transformation, from one thing to another. At my workshop last weekend, one of the students said, I was watching this movie and I couldn't help but think that the movie was really about puberty, you know? And I said, all movies are about puberty. All movies are about death of the old self and birth of the new self. If you write a story where everything at the beginning is exactly the same way as it was at the end, that might be lovely. It's just not a story,
Right.
you know. So we we call that a postcard story, which is just simply describing something. Like I'm going to tell you my 10 favorite places in Mumbai or something like that. But a story encapsulates, I went through this experience and it changed me.
Yeah.
It changed the way I look at the world, my prejudices. I changed the way I see myself, my destiny, and my hopes for the future.
So looking at different types of stories, and ultimately these stories lead to a speech sometimes, they lead to a talk, a
Or a
TED
film,
talk
yeah.
sometimes, or a film sometimes. So what would be the differences there?
There are some things, and we call this the universal story structure. In other words, no matter what the final format is, there are some things that all stories have in common. Change is one of those factors. Increasing tension is one of those factors. Some type of emotional and psychological catharsis is part of it also. But if a movie or a book or a novel, piece of flash fiction, if a story gets me to think about something that I've never thought before, then I consider it my time well spent. The rest of the movie might be terrible, but if for one moment I was able to think about an idea, a novel idea, an original thought that I never had considered before this story started, and I feel like it was worth it.
Now let's talk about something that's called glossophobia.
Okay.
I didn't know there was a medical
All right.
term for it. So the fear of public speaking, which I'm told affects 3 out of 4 people.
Yes.
So obviously you're sitting at the spectrum where public speaking comes to you naturally. But a lot of my viewers there are struggling to even communicate to their parents. So how do we get over this fear of public speaking?
I don't think public speaking comes to me naturally at all. I was terrified of public speaking before I kind of learned how to do it. And I think that's the case. I remember my palms sweating and my voice always catching. But 2 things changed for me when it came to public speaking. The first one was understanding the importance of correct practice. I went to the Jaipur Literature Festival last year, and I overheard somebody giving advice to somebody else about writing, and she said, "What can I do to improve my writing?" And he said to her, "Well, the first thing you need to do is to realize that you either have talent or you don't.
Oh.
You're either born with it or not.
Oh.
So if you're not, then the sooner you find out that, the better you can move on to other things."
Oh my God.
I completely disagree with that, because I think a talent is a function of practicing something the correct way over and over again until you become good at it. Malcolm Gladwell says 10,000 hours of practice.
Yes.
You know, so 10,000 hours gets you to be good at something. So I was able to get my hands on some good literature, and the internet, of course, has tons of available resources to try to teach yourself how to practice better, which I think is crucial. The other thing is confidence. This is supremely important, because I remember giving a talk about one of my documentaries, and I was feeling nervous before the talk because there was a few hundred people in the audience, and then I realized, why am I nervous? I'm an expert on this topic.
Right.
Nobody in the audience knows more about this than I do. What's the worst that can happen? Somebody asks a question and I don't know the answer. I just say, I don't know, that's a great question. But for the most part, I've spent the last 5 years looking at this thing under a microscope. The chance of me not knowing something is very, very small. If you have not practiced, and you don't know your subject well, you should be terrified of public speaking.
Right.
It's 100% logical that you should be terrified. But if you've correctly practiced, got feedback from friends and family about your presentation, as well as done the research that you need to become an expert, you will notice that the reasons for that anxiety is being generated in your system will start to dissipate. Right. There are many, many other factors, but confidence and solid, reliable practice are 2 important ones.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's another thing I find when I do public speaking is I'm tossed up between reading and saying it, learning it, rehearsing it, and reciting it.
Yeah.
And I find that when I read, I don't connect very well with the audience because my eyes are constantly flitting.
Yeah.
But when I recite, I feel like it's not coming from the heart because I've learned it up and I'm reciting it. So how do you balance these 2?
Well, this one is a little bit tricky, but I think you make a really good point, which is that if you rehearse something too much to the point of memorizing it, it feels like a performance.
Right.
You know? So when I'm coaching someone on a TED Talk or another presentation, the first step is for them to come up with some notes. Then throughout the course of the practice, we might realize that there are 5 lines in the presentation that have to be delivered exactly right in order for the thing to make sense.
Makes work.
So then what we do is we memorize those 5, but the rest we keep as notes.
Oh.
And this is very, very useful because I think most people either memorize the whole thing, read the whole thing, and feel like they have to decide between those 2 options.
Yes.
But a hybrid is the best option where you get those lines correct that you need to say, but you also keep the other part spontaneous. Because we know this is true,
Yes.
because how you say something is much more important than what you say.
Absolutely.
Except for those 5 lines, so you can't be too dogmatic about how to make a presentation.
Yeah. So Michael, you've been a teacher of social media. It's something that interests all of us.
Yeah.
So talking about blogs first,
Mm-hmm.
and what do you think should be a structure of a blog? How long should it be? And what should be the features of a good blog article?
I think one of the great things about blogs is that it shows us that people have so much to say, and then everybody has their own adventure. And the tagline for Tall Tales is everyone has at least one great story. When it comes to writing a good blog, though, I mean, just like everything, there's a range of quality. I think that sometimes people forget that blogs are supposed to be informal and introspective, but at the same time, they should be incredibly professional and they should be refined. There's a great book called Terrible Rough Drafts, and I love that because it means that your rough draft is just basically you're purging all the ideas that you have. But not everything that we have to say is interesting. So then you kind of sort through all of that mess and you pull out the things that are good. So I'm a big fan of blogs, but at the same time, they should be, error-free. They should be structured. They should be memorable, and they should, be in a story format or something like that if you want people to think about it years later. And all of that really has to go along with this other idea, which is that there is something in our bones that makes us think that writing should come to us really quickly.
Yeah, right. We've got deadlines for submitting blogs, so I'm sure companies who run this tell their employees that, today is Tuesday, where's your blog article? And you can't think.
And what these deadlines do is they drive quality down and down and down. I always say in my classes that it took me 10 years to write one of my short stories. A great story has something to do with complications. Every story is about a mission to accomplish something. Something happens, you realize that you need to do something, and then you try to do it. Well, the magic number for complications is 3.
Okay.
There should be at least 3 obstacles on your path to achieving your goal, right? So there's no way to come up with these things quickly because you have to plan out the 3 obstacles and the level of complexity and tension and struggle involved in those things. But our culture has made us believe that we can do writing in 5 minutes and have it be unbelievably great. I just try to remind people with what I do that whether it's a blog or a novel or a rough draft, you have to understand that a great story is about deep honesty, about looking into places inside that might be uncomfortable for you to look at. It's like opening the door to a house. At first, it seems like the story is right there in that first room, but the story is actually 7 doors in, and there's no way you can get there going straight from the outside to 7 doors in. You have to open each one.
Sure.
Yeah.
And now not only do we want to do it quickly, we want to do more communication in shorter formats.
Yeah.
So now we want to tell a whole story in 140 characters.
Yeah, and if anyone who's been to my workshop before, they know that I'm completely against this idea that you can tell a story in such a short format. The reason is not because I don't think Twitter doesn't have any uses or anything like that. Far from it. If anybody knows Tall Tales, we use social media all the time.
Right.
It's just that a story is about emotional catharsis, right? You have to explain where you were, where you're going, and how you get there. And there's just no way to do it in that short amount of time. You can create a beautiful moment, and you can create a beautiful poem, all in 140 characters, absolutely. You can't write a story, though.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference.
So Michael, tell us about these wonderful classes that you have in Mumbai.
So about 2.5 years ago, I said, there are so many people who want to be better writers, who are even sending in stories to our show, but don't know how to do it. Why don't I put together a workshop? I think there's one thing I'm proud of more than anything else, which is that I worked on it for 1 year before I did it for the public. I didn't spend one weekend kind of throwing some quotes from the internet together. I chiseled something that I thought would actually make a difference in people's writing. And here we are now, 2.5 years into our workshops. We've trained over 1,000 people.
Awesome.
Every 3 weeks, a group of writers gets together in Mumbai and works on what makes a story, what makes a memorable story, what makes a great character, what makes a great opening, like you said, what makes a great ending as well. And it's turned into like a little family of people who love stories. And it's really great because writing is a lonely thing.
Profession,
yes, it's a lonely
yes.
profession and it's a lonely hobby also. But with our little group, we've created a community that can rely on each other and be in touch with each other and have similar interests. So that's always good.
That's beautiful. I'd love to be part of that community
Anytime,
someday.
of course. About every 3 weeks we have a class. And
So before we end the show, let me ask you this last question of what is the best way to end that story? You know, you build it up and you've taken it right there. And sometimes I find that if you don't have that right ending, it sort of just fizzles out.
yeah, there is no correct answer to that question, but I will tell you my favorite ending to a story. I love it. When you're new to storytelling and new to writing, you might think a good metaphor for a story is railroad tracks. You build it brick by brick, piece by piece, bird by bird. You take it all the way from one place to another place. That even incorporates this idea of change that I talked about. We start in one place and we end in another place. Lovely. But actually a much, much more apt metaphor for storytelling is a flower. Each petal is a step, but in the end it comes all the way back to the beginning. You are still you at the end of the story. The same you that started the story, but something has happened. The journey, some beautiful journey of transformation has happened. And now you're back to yourself, but a new self. You know, kind of the death of the old self, birth of the new self. So I think that kind of circular flower is more useful for storytellers. And for me, that's the best way to end because it reminds everyone who's listening to your story that you don't need to throw your old self away to change. You need to pull out and harvest the best things from your past, but at the same time, make yourself a new future, you know.
Well, that was so beautiful, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And
You're
I'm
welcome.
sure we've learned a lot from you.
Great.
Thank you. Please click the subscribe button below. Like me at facebook.com/ChetChat101. Follow my Twitter handle, ChetChat101, or at Instagram, ChetChat101. Please leave your comments in the sections below. And if you'd like me to feature any particular college, please let me know. Thank you.